All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce Dan Nejfelt, who's presenting Crafting Moral Messages That Resonate in the Media. He's going to self-intro a little bit, but I want to share what this brother has been, that he has been in the trenches. And I want to read from his bio from his website rather than what you see in the Ventla app. It's a little more detailed. So he's part of Faith in Public Life, the Director of Messaging and Online Engagement, and he's been there since 2007. So he's had at least 6 job titles. I imagine some of you can relate to that, and been part of the organization's most exciting achievements, including organizing a nationally televised presidential candidate forum and coverage of passing the Affordable Care Act and defeating discriminatory religious exemption bills in Georgia. Along the way, he has written everything from talking points to op-eds and sign-on letters and prepped faith leaders for interviews with the most blustery pundits on cable news. He's designed polls. He married a co-worker from FPL, and he credits his Lutheran background and his family and his study of civil rights for giving him the thirst for justice that led him to this line of work. Before FPL, Dan taught remedial literacy in rural Arkansas as a Teach for America Corps member, and then studied investigative reporting, magazine editing, strategic communications from the Missouri School of Journalism. And a long time ago, he got a BA in history at the College of William and Mary. So Dan is not able to attend in person. So he did send a message ahead of time, and I was able to preview it. And I just want to say, if you've got any trouble with non-speak and making things clear, it's a great presentation. It's actually really full of great tips, and it's sort of a playbook. It's loaded with info, and I encourage you to take great notes. If he were here, he'd be leading us in a discussion at the end of his talk. I will be doing that, and we're going to take it up a notch. So you might want to join another table if there's only 1 or 2 of you at a table. So without further ado, let's roll tape.
Hi, I'm Dan Nejfelt, Messaging Director at Faith in Public Life. I was honored to be invited to this year's Communicators for Women Religious Conference, and unfortunately I couldn't make it in person. I hope this video is helpful though. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So I've been at Faith in Public Life for 15 years and been doing communications and message development for almost the whole time. And I always find that it's helpful to just really precisely define terms and spell out assumptions and premises and approaches before diving into anything about the nitty-gritty and the skills and tools. By messaging, I mean the use of language and imagery to motivate and persuade people within the context of the audience's time, attention span, knowledge base, and trust. And our approach is that shared values are the foundation of effective messaging, and that it's essential to know as much as you can about your primary audience as far as who they are, what assumptions they have, what positions they have, what their faith background or lack thereof is. Just every piece of information we can have so that we know people's starting points and what is most motivational and what are some lines to not cross. And we also take the approach that inspiring allies who are already with us and persuading people who are conflicted or don't yet agree with us are both simultaneously essential goals. Choosing one or the other is an approach that we don't take. We also believe that messages must serve your long-term narratives, whatever that narrative may be. We want to make sure that anything we say on any particular day doesn't cut against our big picture worldview and the journey we want to take the world on. And lastly, and essentially, stories and values trump facts and policies as messages 7 days a week. So the next couple of slides, I just wanted to spell out what I call some do's and don'ts around messaging. And these are applicable across issues, mediums, audiences, all purpose. These are all purpose principles. One is seeking to motivate rather than seeking to win an argument is the most productive approach in our experience. Always striving to humanize an issue as opposed to commodifying or intellectualizing it is really part of what it means to be a faith-based communicator. Centering in our messaging the people who are on our own side or people who are impacted, who are at the heart of our message, as opposed to centering an antagonist or a harm doer is critical. And we want to make sure that as part of that, we avoid repeating opposing messages. For example, if I work on voting rights a lot, and one thing I would avoid saying is there is no voter fraud. I would say that everybody has the right and freedom to cast their ballot free from any type of interference instead. Using concrete terms as opposed to conceptual terms also helps audiences who don't follow our issues on a day-to-day basis. So as an example of that, I would say food on the table when talking about nutrition assistance, and I would try to eschew terms such as the poverty line, just because it's more abstract and less real on a day-to-day basis. Saying what we're for rather than centering what we're against is also critical. And as we're composing a message, whether it's something long or something short, whether it's spoken, whether it's written, trying to focus on the heart of the matter and deciding like what's really the essence of it, as opposed to trying to be comprehensive and cover everything is really important. And in keeping with that, striving for simplicity rather than sophistication serves us well. And so does using communal, inclusive language, we, us, our, as opposed to distance creating language such as they and them and their. Now, of course, this is not possible to 100% adhere to, but it's a good guidepost to have. Every message, every effective message should check several important boxes. Emotional resonance is very key. People remember how you make how you make them feel more so than they remember any kind of information that you convey. So activating an emotion that is conducive to our goals and consonant with our messaging is key. And making sure our messages are familiar, easy to understand, and believable also. Repeatable, sticky, easy to digest. That's another essential characteristic. And evoking images really sets an effective message apart. And I always think Pope Francis is really good at this, the evoking of images. When he talked about the church as a field hospital, I thought that was a really effective way to lay out a vision, because you can see a field hospital and you associate it with a warm, safe place that of course provides healing. And consistency is the essential way to put effective messaging into practice. Repetition consistently over time really drives things home. As a matter of fact, the brain actually processes familiar things as true things. And that's why we see marketers, politicians, people like that saying the same thing over and over and over. And it's important for us to do it as well. And doing so with consistent, tight terms is essential. When we're saying just a couple of terms about our issue campaigns over and over, rather than using a whole range of terms, we're being more clear. Fewer terms means more clarity. Using more different terms leads to a muddle that is harder to remember. And this is really important, is that facts and statistics are secondary tools rather than the heart of a message. One time I was doing a gun violence messaging training at a church in Georgia, and one of the audience members asked me, she said, "Dan, what's the one key fact that's going to change the gun violence debate?" And I said, "The one key fact is that there is no key fact. We need to put our stories and our moral messages first, and the stats come much later." Now, having said that, facts and statistics can back up and validate a message. And the facts and stats we choose, we want to make sure that they don't require any audience to do math. Things like simple ratios or number amounts that have an everyday relevance are much better than percentiles and complex fractions. So, for instance, saying that Ohio prisons are at 129% capacity is a fact that I saw on a ballot initiative campaign once. And then when we went to retool the message, we landed on the fact that there are 50,000 people, but only 36,000 beds in these prisons. We chose that instead because it was more easily comprehensible and you could see it. A weaker way to present a fact is to say that 2,223,000 Americans are incarcerated. A stronger fact to make the same point is the US puts more people in prison than any nation on earth. And another thing is that the larger a number it is, the harder it is to understand. So if I say that payday loans drain $3.4 billion annually from borrowers, that's a less clear way to say an essential point, which is that a typical payday borrower pays $450 in fees on a $350 loan. Just making our numbers as small as possible or as comprehensible in an everyday way as possible is key. A few years ago, actually, it's getting to be a while ago now. It was 2017. I had been doing messaging from a variety of different approaches for the past several years, and new research came out around the immigration reform debate that showed a particular sequence of messaging was much more effective than what they had previously tried. And that sequence, that formula is values, problem, solution, action. So when we first came across this research, of course, we applied it to immigration messaging right away. And then through experience and experiment across a wide variety of issue areas, we came to see the utility of values, problem, solution, action structure really across pretty much everywhere, and I've come to recommend using it in a variety of contexts, messengers. So what it means is when you're putting together a message, whether it's a press release or an op-ed, remarks, a video script, whatever it may be, leading with values, then describing the problem, then laying out a solution, then making a call to action really unlocks things for an audience. And I want to go through step by step what that looks like and how to do it in the simplest, most compelling way, and then how to weave it all together. Now, a values problem solution action is proven effective across issues, across communities. It's a great time saver that helps you stay consistent and forces you to make some clarifying choices about what really is the most important thing to say in any particular communication. So step one, leading with values. That's how you set the frame. It's absolutely essential. Because people, in order for them to trust and take in and accept as true anything you say, they need to understand where you're coming from and trust your motivation and feel a certain common value set with you. So that's why we lead with it, and we want to make sure that we appeal to very broadly held values, universal values. And we also want to make sure that we appeal across diverse constituencies in terms of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, as well as legal status. So how do we do that? One is choosing universal values is really about stepping back from any political orientation that you or your audience may have, and thinking back to, things that we learned about in terms of right and wrong before we learned about any kind of issue, and making sure that those are relevant to church teaching as well, and drawn from church teaching. Dignity is a huge one. Family, respect, safety, freedom. No matter where you fall on a political spectrum, these are things that we all share, and things that I often recommend to lead with. Another one in Catholic spaces particularly is solidarity, though I would caution that it's kind of a higher level vocabulary word. People might not know what it means as readily as they know what family, freedom, safety, and dignity mean. However, it is a really powerful one that myself as a Protestant, I kind of wish it was as deeply rooted in my church as it is in the Catholic Church. So theology and values are of course inextricably linked. And in messaging, it's important to lay out theology that is really, really simple. I always say, like, second and third grade Sunday school, or CCD at the highest. So references to plenty of stories from the book of Genesis, as well as the story of the Exodus, the parable of the Good Samaritan, and then the Great Commandment and the Beatitudes. Things that are really, really widely known are really, really powerful. So an example of what it looks like to lead with values is, say, I believe we're called to love our neighbors as ourselves. That means making sure that my neighbors are truly safe and truly free, no matter what we look like, or where we live, or what our gender identity is. And you can see there in that second half, it's appealing to diversity of many identities. That draws on a school of messaging called race class narrative. That's really important. So after leading with values, then naming the problem that we are seeking to solve is the next step. We want to make sure that the problems that we lay out are local and concrete. Make it something that people can touch, something people can understand, and laying out how it impacts people, of course, real people. It's whenever possible, I understand there might be constraints about this next point, but whenever possible, identifying an antagonist and ascribing motivation to that antagonist who is doing harm, who is preventing our solution from already being enacted, is part of telling a complete story that people can understand and do something about. We want to make sure to keep it really simple and to avoid the policy weeds. People really know very, very little about policy, so we want to focus on the impact in terms of suffering and things like that. And we also want to be aware of shutting people down. If we make the antagonist seem too powerful, and if we make the problem seem too intractable, people shut down and don't step into the struggle as we want them to. So making sure that we avoid going on at too long of a time length when describing a problem is key. So, and there's ways to make a problem relatable, and that usually involves anecdotes. In the two different columns here, I lay out a typical way that I've seen police discrimination and racial profiling described, and then a way that makes it, I think, more real. MPD engages in racial profiling every day. Statistics clearly show that African Americans are more disproportionately stopped, searched, and arrested across the city, and it's a clear example of systemic racism. Now, to take a more anecdote-based approach, I could say that my neighbor has been pulled over by police 8 times in the past 5 years, never for a significant reason. On the exact same streets, I've never been pulled over once, and I'm white and he's black. And that's what systemic racism looks like. And that's a personally true story from my life. But you can see here that if a person doesn't really put credence into statistics, we can make it relevant by pointing to the way it plays out. And before we use a term like systemic racism, we have done the show don't tell approach in a way that people can see. So after we lead with values and then lay out the problem, then we lay out our solution. Now, the solution is actually the outcome rather than just the policy that we seek, that better, brighter world that people can live in. And being really specific about that and optimistic, speaking of it as something that we are bringing into being or that we can bring into being is an essential of the approach. Describing the kind of nation or the kind of world or the kind of church we want to be is something to lace into this section of it as well, and also to be looping back to our values. What does that look like? I believe every person in our nation should be free from fear in the streets and at home, not worrying about violence or being singled out by police based on what they look like. That's why we need to work together to reimagine public safety. Be free from fear, not singled out based on what they look like. That's values, that's everyday emotion, that's appeal to diverse identities, all in the space of a sentence. And you can do this. When you present with the guide star of leading with values and making things as concise as possible and as tangible. And then fourth is ending our messages with a call to action that brings the audience to try and bring about the change that we seek. And it's really important to be clear on who your call to action is addressing. Sometimes your message is targeting the people who are directly hearing it, the reader, the listener, the audience member. Other times, a call to action is going to be addressing a targeted decision maker if you're taking your messages into the policy space. So being really clear on that will shape the actual substance of your ask. So it's something I always ask myself, like if I'm writing an op-ed, I'm like, okay, so who is really being told to do something here? Is it the reader who is at home, or is it that reader's elected representative? And then tailoring what I say to the answer to that question. Making sure that a call to action is concrete and that it's one thing rather than do A or B or C. There's a term called the paradox of choice, which is that if you give people 3 different options they can do, they don't take action. Whereas if you give people one action to do, they're more likely to do it. So a call to action with where the target is directly the audience themselves. Example is here in the left column. We all need to do our part. It starts with courageous conversations. People of goodwill need to seek out our neighbors who disagree and share our stories about why we need a new approach to public safety. People of goodwill seek out neighbors, share our stories. Boom, boom, boom. It's all related. It's really all the same thing. A decision maker targeted call to action would be that we need more than words from Mayor Frey. That's a mayor here in my local community. We need action. He has a moral responsibility to keep the community safe by fully funding violence prevention programs instead of the failed policies of the past. You can see here naming the name, contrasting what's been done with before with what needs to be done now, and just being super direct about what concrete policy change we need him to make. And as essential as anything else is finding someone who can help you out as a writer or a speaker or a designer. You know already that there's no substitute for a second set of eyes on your work. And just, it almost goes without saying, but it's so important that I wanted to put a pin in here. You know, having someone, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like a professional editor. It could just be a colleague who knows what you're trying to say, but hasn't been down in the weeds with you. Want to make sure that editing happens with an eye toward length, clarity, accuracy, any holes in what you're saying, and making sure that it has as much power as it possibly can. And you know, oftentimes it doesn't take like a full-time professional do this all day editor. It could just be someone who is conversant in the issue and who knows how to communicate clearly, who can just provide you some honest feedback. Now, stories, as I'm sure you already know, are the most powerful form of message that there is. But storytelling is also, you know, an incredibly involved and complex craft. I actually once was a student in a 3-day-long training where the only thing we were doing the whole time is learning how to tell our own personal story. So I don't claim to be able to summarize all that goes into effective storytelling in the space of a couple of minutes here. However, I did want to just share a few essentials that I've seen over time validated and put into use really well. One, making sure that our stories are concise, essentials only. We want to make sure that there's no background knowledge required in order to understand it, and that the story is linear. It has a beginning in the distant past, a middle in the medium past, and an end in the most recent past, beginning, middle, end. We want to avoid things such as flashbacks and asides. And every compelling story has a hero, a villain, motivation, conflict, and resolution, either a resolution that's already happened or a resolution that we're seeking to push toward in the future. And you know, focusing the story on one person or one family is essential, including humanizing details, evoking images. These are both things that really bring it to life. Showing rather than telling, of course, and making clear that a story is highlighting something that's common rather than an extreme outlier is an essential thing to do either at the beginning or at the end. I know for message research around undocumented students, who were trying to get DACA status or protections under the DREAM Act. Whenever audiences would hear, the story about an individual person, the reaction would be, "Oh, well, we should help that person. That sounds awful." Not understanding that it's a systemic problem rather than just one person falling unfortunately or accidentally through the cracks. We want to make sure that whoever we're shining a light on, that the audience understands that that person is not alone. And so the humanizing detail piece, that is something I want to just say a little more about. As the details are what brings a story to life. So whenever I'm listening to someone's story to try and sharpen it for media, I'm always looking for that one little thing. One time I was helping a young woman tell the story about the time when her mother's workplace was raided by ICE, by immigration enforcement, and many workers were taken away. And as she was speaking, I asked her the question. I said, "Well, how many times did you call your mother, trying to find out whether she'd been taken or not?" And she said, "I called her 11 times." And then as we were going through, exactly what was going to go into her remarks, she thought, and I agreed, that, that detail about those 11 calls, really showed the urgency, the panic, the fear. So, searching for that one or two things that really bring it to life is something that's, to me, just as important as saying, what's my beginning, what's my middle, what's my end. What is that really make it real, heartstring type of detail. Now, if I were there in person with you today, I would love to have some give and take, some lessons from experience. So as you have time left together in the room today, I would encourage you to turn to a neighbor who you did not come in with, and share a story about a time that a message has gone well for you. And just say, what that message was and why you think it worked. And then have the other person share that story. If you have time to do that, I always say that the wisdom of the group is so powerful. And if I were here with you in person, I would try and facilitate that. So I hope this has been helpful. I know it went pretty fast, but very grateful for your time and for your work, and to the organizers from Communicators for Women Religious. Thank you again so much for including me and thinking of me. And I hope next time around I could come in person. Thanks.
Was anyone else struck by how much simpler things seem to be with what he's asking us to do? Just keep it simple, right? Okay, so we have some slides here in a moment, and I'll be the faith in public life proxy with some of these questions. So Dan asks at the end here, share a story of a time when a message has gone well, and why do you think it worked? And I wanted to expand on that. And what's your biggest win? When you landed a message just perfectly, what happened with that? So tell a story about that. Or if something kind of went off the rails, what's a story or maybe a campaign that you created that had unexpected but positive results? And then we'll go for a second slide. More questions. Thank you. Another slide. Okay, a hush falls over the room. So I like that formula. I don't know if you already have a formula. What is your formula for effective messaging? And then some of the things that we heard Dan talk about, do's and don'ts. Do you have your own tried and true tips you can share when crafting messages? And I thought about trying to do a little workshop incubator kind of thing with the weak versus strong. I thought that was kind of cool. maybe you can take a look at some of your last posts, and are there ways that you can make it stronger or simpler and make it more effective?